There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, moments that wear the simple, unassuming camouflage of a Tuesday night or a shared pizza. They slip in under the door while you are not looking, and only later, when you trace the timeline of your own heart, do you realize they were not moments at all. They were hinges. They were the silent, pivotal points upon which the entire architecture of your future turned. For me, that moment arrived on the humid, sticky breath of a late July evening, carried on three simple, nonsensical words. The air conditioner in the window of our small apartment was fighting a losing battle against the city's oppressive heat, its labored hum a constant, monotonous backdrop to our lives. The sound was so familiar it had become a form of silence. Outside, sirens wailed their melancholy lullabies, and the distant rumble of the elevated train was a rhythmic, metallic heartbeat. We were sprawled on the old, worn couch, the one we had hauled up 3 flights of stairs 2 years prior, a monument to our shared history and questionable furniture choices. A nature documentary was playing on the television, its vibrant colors a stark contrast to the muted tones of our living room, where the only light came from the screen's electric blue glow and the sliver of orange street lamp filtering through the blinds. Liam was next to me, a familiar and solid presence. His long frame was folded into the corner of the couch, his head resting against the back cushion, eyes half closed. The documentary narrator was murmuring about the migratory patterns of Arctic terns, and the sound of waves crashing on some distant, icy shore filled the space between us. I was acutely aware of the inches separating his arm from mine, a territory I had spent years carefully navigating. It was a space charged with the invisible, high-voltage current of everything I had never said. For 3 years, Liam had been the steady, gravitational center of my world, a fixed point around which my own quiet, orbiting life revolved. He was my roommate. He was my best friend. And, in the secret, heavily guarded chambers of my own mind, he was the keeper of a love I was certain would remain a permanent, silent resident within me, a ghost haunting the hallways of my own heart. The air in the room was thick and warm, clinging to my skin like a second layer. I could feel a trickle of sweat tracing a path down my temple. It was, by any objective measure, a sweltering night, the kind of night where the city itself seems to exhale a collective, weary sigh. And that was when he spoke. His voice was low, slightly rough with impending sleep. "I'm cold." The words were so absurd, so completely at odds with the physical reality of the room, that for a second, my brain refused to process them. It was like hearing someone complain of thirst while standing in the middle of a rainstorm. I turned to look at him, a half smile, a gentle joke already forming on my lips. But he was not looking at me. His gaze was fixed on the television, on the stark, beautiful footage of glaciers calving into a frozen sea. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light, a landscape of soft shadows and fleeting highlights. I saw the line of his jaw, the gentle curve of his mouth, the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead. It was a face I had catalogued 1,000 times, a study in light and form that I knew better than my own. I had photographed him, both with my camera and with the shutter of my mind's eye, in every conceivable light, capturing the nuances of his moods, the ghost of a smile, the furrow of concentration. He was my most familiar subject and my most profound mystery. Before I could formulate a response, before the gentle ribbing about the thermodynamics of our third-floor apartment in July could leave my mouth, he moved. It was not a grand gesture, nothing sudden or dramatic. It was a slow, deliberate slide, a subtle recalibration of his position on the worn fabric of the couch. And then his hands, which I knew to be large and warm and capable from years of watching him fix everything from a leaky faucet to my broken tripod, were finding their way into the space between my body and the sofa cushion. They were tentative at first, a hesitant exploration of a new frontier. Then, with a quiet sigh that seemed to hold the weight of a long, exhausting day, he slipped them under the hem of my t-shirt. His fingers, impossibly, shockingly cool against the heat of my skin, rested on my stomach. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle, every nerve ending, every silent, hopeful, terrified cell in my being snapped to attention. It was as if a live wire had been pressed against me, sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated shock through my system. The documentary, the city, the humming air conditioner. It all faded away into a distant, irrelevant hum. The world narrowed to that single, astonishing point of contact. His palms were flat against me, his fingers spread wide, an anchor in the sweltering, uncertain sea of the evening. He was not groping, not exploring. It was a gesture of simple, declarative placement. A statement. I am here. My breath hitched in my throat, trapped somewhere between my lungs and my lips. I was a photographer. I lived my life through a lens, finding meaning in composition, in the interplay of light and shadow, in the decisive moment. I was an observer by nature, a professional at maintaining distance. My entire friendship with Liam had been an exercise in careful framing, in keeping my own chaotic, overexposed feelings just outside the shot. I had built walls, fortified boundaries, and constructed an elaborate internal architecture of self-preservation to protect the one thing I could not bear to lose, his friendship. That friendship was a quiet, comfortable room, and I had been content to live within its four walls. Even if it meant staring at a locked door I desperately wished I had the key to open. But with that one simple, impossible gesture, Liam had not just knocked on that door. He had dismantled it, plank by plank, and stepped inside, leaving me standing exposed in the sudden, blinding light of a new and terrifying possibility. His hands were still under my shirt, his thumb tracing an idle, unconscious circle against my skin. And in the oppressive heat of that July night, I felt a chill run through me that had absolutely nothing to do with the temperature. It was the chill of the unknown, the terrifying, exhilarating shiver of a world that had just been irrevocably, and perhaps beautifully, altered. To understand the seismic impact of that moment, you have to understand the landscape that existed before the tremor. You have to know the geology of our friendship, the tectonic plates of affection and restraint that had been grinding against each other just beneath the surface for years. Liam and I met during our sophomore year of college, thrown together by a university housing algorithm that possessed either a cruel sense of humor or a prescient, mystical wisdom. I was quiet, an art student who spent more time in the campus darkroom, lost in the chemical scent of developer and the magic of an emerging image, than I did at any social gathering. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of easy charm and boundless energy, studying computer science, but seemingly majoring in people. He collected friends the way other people collected stamps, effortlessly and with genuine enthusiasm. On paper, we were an impossible pairing, the shadow and the sun, the observer and the observed, the quiet anchor and the billowing sail. Yet, somehow it worked. Our differences became our points of connection. He would burst into our dorm room, trailing stories and laughter, and pull me out of my self-imposed solitude, insisting I needed to see the sunset from the top of the library or try the questionable tacos from a new food truck. In return, I offered him a calm harbor. He would come back from his whirlwind days, his social battery depleted, and collapse onto his bed, talking for hours about coding problems, frustrations with professors, or the intricate politics of his intramural soccer team. I learned to listen, not just to his words, but to the spaces between them, to the quiet anxieties he hid beneath his confident exterior. I became the curator of his unspoken fears, the silent archivist of his vulnerabilities. Our room became a sanctuary, a place where he could shed the skin of the person everyone expected him to be and just be. And I, in turn, found a safety in his presence that I had never known. He never pushed me to be more outgoing, never made me feel deficient for my quiet nature. He simply made space for me, accepting my silence as a valid form of communication, a language he slowly learned to understand. The shift in my own feelings was not a sudden earthquake, but a slow, imperceptible continental drift. There was no single moment of revelation, no dramatic lightning strike. It was a gradual accumulation of small details, 1,000 tiny snapshots that, when collected and arranged together, formed an undeniable portrait of love. It was the way he'd bring me a coffee from the campus cafe, remembering exactly how I took it without ever having been told. It was the fierce, protective glare he'd shoot anyone who tried to talk over me in a group conversation. It was the time I was sick with a miserable flu, and he skipped a major party, an event he'd been looking forward to for weeks, to stay in our dorm, making me tea and reading aloud from a terrible sci-fi novel in a series of ridiculous voices just to make me laugh. It was in those quiet, unglamorous moments that the foundation of my affection settled and solidified. I was photographing a campus event for the student newspaper one afternoon, and I saw him across the quad, deep in conversation with a group of friends, laughing at something someone had said. The autumn light was golden and low, catching the highlights in his hair and casting the sharp, handsome lines of his face in high relief. He looked vibrant, alive, completely in his element. And as I raised my camera, focusing the lens, my heart gave a painful, definitive lurch. It was a feeling so sharp and clear it was like the click of a shutter, capturing an image that would be permanently burned onto the film of my memory. In that single, sun-drenched second, I knew I was in love with him. And I knew it was a hopeless, impossible complication. After graduation, when the prospect of our lives diverging became a terrifyingly real possibility, it was Liam who suggested we get an apartment together. He presented it as a practical solution, a matter of finances and convenience. It just makes sense, he'd said, casual and pragmatic. We know we can live together without wanting to kill each other. That's half the battle right there for him. It was a logical extension of our established dynamic. For me, it was a lifeline. It was a stay of execution for the quiet, domestic world we had built. And so we moved into the small, three-room apartment with the rattling air conditioner and the perpetually dripping kitchen faucet. We fell into a new rhythm, one dictated by work schedules and city life. He started a demanding job as a software consultant, which involved long hours and frequent travel. I pieced together a living with freelance photography gigs, turning our second, tiny bedroom into a makeshift studio and darkroom. Our home became the constant in our changing lives. It was the place he returned to after a grueling week in another city, dropping his bags by the door with a weary sigh of relief. It was the quiet space where I could edit my photos late into the night, the soft glow of my monitor the only light in the sleeping apartment. And, of course, there was Sarah. Liam and Sarah had been together since our senior year of college. She was bright and kind and ambitious, a perfect match for his energy. I liked her genuinely. I never felt any animosity toward her, only a quiet, hollow ache of envy. She was a fact of his life, a permanent fixture in the architecture I was studying so intently. Her presence defined the boundaries of my relationship with Liam. She was the clear, bold line that marked the territory of friendship, a border I knew I could never cross. Their relationship was the reason I kept my feelings locked down so tightly, buried under layers of rationalization and denial. To acknowledge my love for Liam would be to betray not only him, but her as well. It would be a destructive act, a demolition of the careful, peaceful structure we all inhabited. So I played my part. I was the supportive friend, the good roommate. I listened to Liam talk about his future with her, about their plans to one day buy a house in the suburbs. I smiled, and I offered advice, and with every word, I felt myself building the walls around my own heart a little bit higher, a little bit thicker. The apartment was our shared space, but it was also a stage, and on it, I gave the performance of a lifetime, playing the role of the easygoing, platonic friend, a role I had become so adept at that I sometimes almost convinced myself. The first crack in that carefully constructed world appeared on a rainy Tuesday in April, about 6 months before the incident on the couch. Liam came home from a trip to Chicago a day early. I heard his key in the lock and was surprised. He was not due back until Wednesday evening. When he walked in, he did not drop his bags by the door with his usual weary relief. He placed them down slowly, deliberately, as if they were made of glass. He was soaked from the rain, his hair plastered to his forehead, his suit jacket dark with moisture. But it was the look on his face that stopped me. It was a hollowed-out expression, a vacancy in his eyes that I had never seen before. He looked like a building that had been gutted by a fire, the familiar facade still standing, but with nothing left inside. He walked past me without a word, went into his bedroom, and shut the door. The quiet click of the latch echoed in the silent apartment, a sound as final and definitive as a gavel. He stayed in his room for the rest of the night. I made dinner, my movements slow and uncertain. The familiar rituals of our shared domestic life felt alien and wrong in the face of his silent retreat. I left a plate for him on the counter, covered it with foil, and then retreated to my own room, feeling like an intruder in my own home. Later that night, long after the city had quieted, I heard his door open. I heard his footsteps, hesitant in the hallway, and then the soft creak of the couch. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my ears straining for any sound, any clue. All I could hear was the rain drumming against the window pane and the profound, suffocating silence from the other room. Sometime after 2 in the morning, I finally gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The only light was the dim glow from the microwave clock, and I saw him, a silhouette on the couch, staring out the window at the rain-streaked city lights. He did not turn as I approached. "She ended it," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. The words just hung there in the dark, heavy and cold. "Sarah, she ended it." I did not know what to say. The usual platitudes, the easy reassurances, all felt like cheap, flimsy things in the face of his grief. So I said nothing. I just stood there in the dark kitchen, a silent witness to the quiet demolition of his world. He began to talk, his voice a low monotone. He recounted their last conversation, the stilted, painful words exchanged over the phone. He spoke of plans that had dissolved into thin air, of a future that had been erased. He was not crying. He was simply reporting, like a journalist describing the aftermath of a disaster. I listened, my heart aching for him, a strange and guilty mix of empathy for his pain and a tiny, shameful flicker of something I dared not name. It was not hope. It was something more fragile, more tentative. It was the faintest glimmer of light seeping through a newly formed crack in a wall that had once been impenetrable. I stayed with him until the rain stopped and the first gray light of dawn began to seep into the sky, replacing the artificial orange glow of the city. He never looked at me, just kept his eyes fixed on the window, as if the story was written on the wet glass. When he finally fell silent, a heavy, exhausted quiet settled over us. He had emptied himself of words, and I had simply absorbed them, holding them for him. It was a turning point, a subtle but significant shift in the gravitational pull between us. In his grief, he had let me into a room inside himself that had always been reserved for her. The door had been left ajar, and I, the quiet observer, had been allowed to step across the threshold. The weeks that followed were a study in quiet melancholy. Liam moved through our apartment like a ghost, a pale imitation of the vibrant man I knew. His easy laughter, once the constant soundtrack of our home, was gone. It was replaced by a heavy silence that seemed to absorb all the light and sound in the room. He went to work, he came home, he ate the food I put in front of him, but he was not really there. His body was present, but his spirit was adrift, lost in the fog of his heartbreak. I watched him, my heart a constant, dull ache in my chest. I felt helpless. My photography had taught me how to capture a moment, how to freeze an emotion in a frame, but it gave me no tools to heal one. All I could do was be present, a steady, unobtrusive feature in his altered landscape. I kept the apartment clean. I made sure we had groceries. I would put on a movie in the evenings, something mindless and distracting, hoping to offer a temporary reprieve from the relentless churn of his thoughts. It was during one of these movie nights that the new ritual began, innocently at first. We were watching some old black and white film, and Liam, who had been sitting rigidly at his end of the couch, finally seemed to relax. The tension slowly seeped out of his shoulders, and as the movie wore on, his head began to nod. Eventually, he fell asleep, his head slumping sideways until it came to rest, gently, on my shoulder. My entire body froze. I sat there, ramrod straight, for what felt like hours, afraid to even breathe for fear of waking him. His head was a warm, heavy weight against me. I could feel the soft tickle of his hair against my neck, smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. It was the closest we had been in years, a proximity born of exhaustion and accident, but it felt momentous. I studied the sliver of his face I could see, the dark sweep of his eyelashes against his cheek, the relaxed line of his mouth. It was a moment of profound, painful intimacy. He was so close, so vulnerable, and yet a universe away. I was his friend, his roommate, a convenient pillow. That was all. I repeated it to myself like a mantra, a shield against the dangerous tide of hope that was rising within me. When the movie ended, I did not move. I let him sleep, my own exhaustion a distant second to the overwhelming need to preserve that fragile, fleeting connection. This became our new normal. Movie nights became a fixture, an unspoken agreement. He would come home from work, shed the armor of his professional life, and we would retreat to the couch. And, more often than not, he would fall asleep. Sometimes he would lean against me from the start, a silent request for an anchor in his turbulent emotional sea. Other times, it would be a slow, gradual drift, a slow-motion collapse into my space. I never acknowledged it. I never commented on it. To speak of it would be to give it a name, to force it into a category, and I was terrified of what that might do. I was terrified that if I pointed it out, he would recoil, embarrassed, and the fragile bridge that was forming between us would crumble. So I said nothing. I simply allowed it, my body becoming a fixed point, a place of rest for him. I learned the specific weight of his head on my shoulder, the rhythm of his breathing as he slept. I learned to distinguish the deep, even breaths of true rest from the shallow, troubled sleep that was haunted by his recent loss. I became a scholar of his unconscious state, my observations a secret, intimate study. And then came the cold. It started on a cool evening in late May. A storm had blown in, and the temperature had dropped unexpectedly. I had a thick blanket draped over my legs as we watched TV. Liam was shivering slightly, dressed only in a t-shirt and shorts. Without thinking, I unfolded the blanket and extended it, offering him a share. He accepted with a quiet murmur of thanks, pulling the edge of the fleece over his own legs. Under the shared cover, our legs brushed against each other. It was another small, accidental intimacy, but it felt like a current of electricity passing between us. He shifted, moving a little closer, and the casual contact became a steady, solid pressure. We sat like that for the entire movie, a silent, shared warmth under a single blanket, while the storm raged outside our window. It felt like we were in a bubble, a small, protected space shielded from the world. That blanket became a part of the ritual. Even as the weather warmed, as spring turned into the humid embrace of summer, the blanket remained. And with it came the words. "I'm cold," he would say, his voice soft, almost an apology. It was a fiction, a transparent excuse we both implicitly agreed not to question. It was the password that granted him access to a level of physical comfort he clearly needed but did not know how to ask for directly. It was his plausible deniability. He was not seeking my touch. He was merely seeking warmth. The phrase became a prelude, a quiet announcement that the boundaries were about to be blurred once again. Each time he said it, my heart would perform a frantic, complicated dance, a tango of hope and fear. Part of me soared, convinced that this charade, this repeated, gentle lie, had to mean something more. It was a script we were performing, and its subtext felt overwhelmingly romantic. But the other part of me, the cautious, self-protective part, whispered that I was projecting, that I was seeing what I wanted to see. He was grieving. He was lonely. I was convenient. I was a source of uncomplicated, platonic comfort. I was a human hot water bottle. To imagine anything more was to set myself up for a devastating fall. The ritual escalated, as rituals often do, in slow, almost imperceptible increments. The shared blanket led to him tucking his feet under my legs. His head on my shoulder became his arm draped casually over my stomach. Each new step was a test, a question he was asking without words. Is this okay? Can I move a little closer? And with my stillness, with my quiet acceptance, I was answering him. Yes, you are safe here. The couch, our worn, unassuming couch, became a sacred space, an island where the normal rules of our friendship were suspended. It was a place of profound contradictions. It was where I felt the most intense connection to him, and also the most profound loneliness. I held him, I comforted him, I provided a safe harbor for his weary body, but he was not truly mine to hold. I was a stand-in, a substitute for the comfort he had lost. The thought was a constant, bitter undercurrent beneath the sweet, warm surface of our new intimacy. I was a darkroom technician, carefully developing this fragile, precious image of closeness, terrified that a single wrong move, a single burst of light, would overexpose the print and leave me with nothing but a black, ruined sheet of paper. This brings us back to that sweltering July night, back to the hum of the air conditioner, the murmuring documentary, and the three words that defied all logic. I'm cold this time, however, it was different. This time, there was no blanket to serve as a buffer, no prop in our ongoing play. This time, The excuse was so thin, so patently absurd, that it felt less like a reason and more like a surrender. It was an admission that the pretense was no longer necessary, or perhaps no longer possible to maintain. When his hand slipped under my shirt, it was a crossing of a new, more significant boundary. It was the first time his touch had been skin to skin, a direct and unequivocal contact. The shock of it was not just in the physical sensation, the surprising coolness of his fingers against the heat of my stomach, but in the boldness of the act. He had bypassed all the usual intermediaries. He had discarded the script. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My mind was a chaotic whirlwind of questions. What did this mean? Was this an accident, a gesture made in a half-asleep haze? Or was it intentional, a deliberate, conscious act? The thumb that had been tracing lazy circles on my skin stilled. His breathing, which had been deep and even, seemed to catch for a moment. He was not asleep. I was suddenly, terrifyingly certain of it. He was awake. He was aware. And he was not moving his hands. The silence in the room stretched, pulled taut like a wire. The narrator on the television was now talking about the incredible, perilous journey the Arctic terns make, flying from pole to pole, guided by an instinct they do not understand. I felt a kinship with those birds, navigating by some internal, magnetic pull toward a destination I could not see, guided by a hope that felt both innate and insane. Slowly, tentatively, he shifted his weight. He turned his head, which had been resting on the back of the couch, and laid it gently in the hollow of my shoulder. His face was now pressed against my neck, his breath a warm puff of air against my skin. His hands remained where they were, a steady, warm pressure on my stomach. Every rational thought I possessed screamed at me to do something, to say something, to make a joke and break the tension, to ask him what he was doing, to gently remove his hands and re-establish the boundaries he had just obliterated. It would be the safe thing to do, the sensible thing. It would protect our friendship. It would protect my heart from the inevitable wreckage of misinterpretation. But I could not move. I was paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming force of my own longing. For years, I had dreamed of this, of a moment of unguarded, unambiguous affection from him. And now that it was here, it was so much more terrifying and beautiful than I could have ever imagined. It was a fragile, perfect thing, and I was terrified that any movement, any word, would shatter it. So I did nothing. I sat in the flickering blue light of the television, a living statue, with my best friend's hands under my shirt and his head on my shoulder, and I let myself, for the first time, simply exist in the moment without trying to frame it, analyze it, or protect myself from it. I let the hope, dangerous and bright, wash over me. The documentary ended. The credits rolled, casting our silent tableau in a stark, white light before the screen went black. The room was plunged into near darkness, the only illumination now coming from the city outside. Liam did not move. His breathing was a soft, steady rhythm against my neck. I tilted my head just slightly, resting my cheek against the top of his hair. It was soft, and it smelled like him, a scent that was as familiar and comforting to me as the scent of my own home. We stayed like that for a long, long time, adrift in the quiet darkness. Two people on a couch, in a hot city apartment, creating a small pocket of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. And in that silence, a new question began to form in my mind, a question that was less of an intellectual query and more of a deep, resonant feeling. It was no longer, what does this mean? It was, what happens now? The night bled into the early hours of the morning, and we remained intertwined on the couch, a sculpture of unspoken things. Sleep eventually found me, not a deep or restful sleep, but a series of light, drifting states of consciousness, each one punctuated by the startling, grounding awareness of Liam's presence against me. His weight was a constant, reassuring anchor. His hands, now warm, were a permanent fixture under my shirt. I woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the blinds, painting stripes across the living room floor. My neck was stiff, my leg had fallen asleep, but I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet hum of contentment beneath the surface of my anxiety. Liam was still asleep, his face turned towards my chest, his expression peaceful in a way I had not seen in months. He looked younger, the lines of stress and grief smoothed away by rest. I watched him, my heart swelling with a feeling so potent it was almost painful. It was a dangerous, fragile moment, a perfect bubble of intimacy, and I knew, with a sinking certainty, that it was about to burst. He woke slowly, stirring with a soft groan. His eyes fluttered open, and for a brief, disoriented second, he looked at me with a soft, unfocused gaze. Then, recognition dawned, and with it, a sudden, sharp awareness of our position. He went rigid. He pulled his hands from under my shirt as if he had been burned, scrambling to sit up, putting a sudden and jarring distance between us. The space he vacated was instantly, achingly cold. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, refusing to meet my eyes. The comfortable silence of the night had evaporated, replaced by a thick, crackling tension. The air between us was electric with all the things we were not saying. I must have fallen asleep, he mumbled, his voice hoarse. He stood up abruptly, stretching his arms over his head in a forced, unnatural gesture of nonchalance. Sorry about that. Must have been cramping your style. It's fine, I said, my own voice sounding small and distant. Don't worry about it. But it was not fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. His retreat was a physical blow, a confirmation of my deepest fears. It had been an accident, a mistake, a half-conscious search for comfort that, in the light of day, was a source of embarrassment for him. He was already backing away, rebuilding the walls he had dismantled the night before, brick by frantic brick. He muttered something about needing to get ready for work and disappeared into his room, closing the door behind him with a soft but definitive click. I was left alone in the living room, in the debris of our shared moment. The sun was rising, flooding the room with a bright, unforgiving light that seemed to mock the tender, secret world we had inhabited in the dark. I felt like a fool. I had let my hope run wild, and now it was lying bruised and broken at my feet. The warmth of his touch still lingered on my skin, a ghost of a sensation that now felt like a brand of my own naivete. The days that followed were an exercise in excruciating politeness. The comfortable, easy rhythm of our life was gone, replaced by a stilted, awkward choreography. We moved around each other like strangers, careful not to brush up against each other in the narrow hallway. Our conversations reduced to brief, functional exchanges about bills and groceries. The couch, our former sanctuary, became a no-man's land, a piece of furniture we both avoided. The movie night stopped. The rituals, the excuses, the shared blanket, they all vanished, as if they had been part of a collective dream from which we had both now woken. Liam was a ghost again, but this time it was not grief that made him spectral. It was avoidance. He left for work before I was awake and came home late, often after I had already retreated to my room. When we were in the same space, he was constantly occupied, his face buried in his laptop, his phone pressed to his ear. He was creating a force field of busyness around himself, a shield to keep me, and the memory of that night, at a distance. The silence was worse than any argument. It was a heavy, suffocating thing, filled with the weight of my misinterpretation and his regret. I replayed the events of that night over and over in my mind, a masochistic loop of analysis. I dissected every gesture, every breath, searching for the exact moment I had gotten it so wrong. Had I imagined the tenderness? Had I projected my own desires onto his simple, unconscious need for comfort? The shame was a physical weight, a constant pressure in my chest. I had allowed myself to believe in a possibility that had never existed, and now I was paying the price. Our friendship, the thing I had guarded so fiercely, felt like it was crumbling to dust, and it was my own fault. My quiet, hopeful heart had become a traitor, and its betrayal had cost me everything. After nearly a week of this Cold War, I reached a breaking point. I was in my darkroom, the red safe light casting an eerie, submerged glow over the trays of chemicals. I was trying to develop a series of portraits I had taken, but my hands were unsteady, my focus shot. I watched an image of a stranger's face slowly emerge on the paper, a face full of life and emotion, and I felt a sudden, sharp pang of frustration. My entire life was about capturing truth, about bringing hidden things into the light. Yet here I was, living in a fog of unspoken truths, suffocating in the dark. I could not live like this anymore. I could not live in the ruins of our friendship, tiptoeing around the ghost of a moment that I did not even understand. I needed to know. Even if the answer was devastating, even if it meant the final, complete end of what we had, I needed the clarity. The ambiguity was a poison, and it was slowly killing me. I found him in the living room, staring at his laptop, though I could tell he was not really working. His shoulders were tense, his focus a million miles away. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my courage. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. "Liam," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. He jumped slightly, startled by my presence. He looked up, his expression guarded. "Hey, what's up?" I walked into the room, my steps feeling heavy, deliberate. I did not sit down. I stood in front of the couch, forcing him to look up at me. "We need to talk." A flicker of panic crossed his face. "I'm kind of busy right now, F. Can it wait?" "No," I said, the word coming out sharper than I intended. "No, it can't." He sighed, a long, weary sound, and closed his laptop. He leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest, a defensive posture. The room was silent for a moment, the only sound the familiar hum of the air conditioner, a witness to our history. "What happened last week?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "On the couch." He flinched, his eyes darting away from mine. "Nothing happened. I was tired. I fell asleep. I already said I was sorry if I made you uncomfortable." "You weren't asleep," I said, the certainty of it ringing in my voice. "Not the whole time. And you know that's not what I'm talking about." He stared at a fixed point on the wall behind me, his jaw tight. He was retreating again, disappearing behind his wall of denial. The sight of it, of his fear, ignited a spark of anger in me. It was an anger born of hurt, of the deep, painful wound his avoidance had inflicted. "Look at me, Liam," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Please, just look at me and tell me the truth. If it was a mistake, just say it. If you regret it, fine. I can take it. But this silence, this pretending like I'm a stranger in our own home, I can't. It's not fair." He finally, reluctantly, met my gaze. His eyes were a turbulent sea of confusion and something else, something I could not quite name. It looked like fear. He looked terrified. "I don't know," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I don't know what happened." "What don't you know?" I pressed, my voice softening slightly at his visible distress. "Don't you know why you did it? Or don't you know what it meant?" He shook his head, a gesture of profound, helpless frustration. He looked trapped. "Both. Neither. I'm so confused," he finally broke, the words spilling out of him in a rush, a torrent of confession. "After Sarah left, everything just fell apart. My whole life, the whole plan I had for it, it was just gone. And you were just there? You were so solid, so quiet. You were the only thing that made sense. And being near you, it was like, it was the only time I felt safe. The only time the noise in my head would stop." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "That night, I wasn't thinking. I was just feeling. I was tired and I was lonely, and you were there, and it just felt right to be close to you. And I knew it was weird. I knew it was crossing a line, but I couldn't stop myself. It was like my body knew what it needed, even if my brain didn't." He finally looked at me, his eyes pleading, raw with a vulnerability I had never seen from him before. "And then I woke up, and the sun was up, and it was all real. And it scared the hell out of me. Because it didn't fit. It doesn't fit with who I thought I was. It doesn't fit with anything." His confession hung in the air between us, honest and messy and painful. He had not said it was a mistake. He had not said he regretted it. He had said it felt right, and that it scared him. The anger that had been simmering inside me dissolved, replaced by a wave of overwhelming empathy. He was not avoiding me because he was repulsed by what had happened. He was avoiding me because he was terrified of it. He was terrified of what it meant about him, about us. He was not running from me. He was running from himself. I finally sat down, not next to him on the couch, but on the coffee table in front of him, closing the remaining distance. Our knees were almost touching. I looked at him, at this brilliant, beautiful, and utterly lost man who I had loved in silence for so long, and I knew that this was it. This was the moment for the truth. Not just his, but mine as well. The darkroom had taught me that you could not force an image to appear. You had to give it time, the right conditions, the right chemistry. And then, when it was ready, you had to commit. You had to pull it from the developer before it was lost to the darkness. This was that moment. "It didn't scare me," I said, my voice soft but clear in the quiet room. "Liam, It didn't scare me at all. I took a deep breath, the deepest breath of my life. I've been in love with you for years. The silence that followed was different. It was not the tense, angry silence of the past week. It was a silence of pure, unadulterated shock. Liam's eyes widened, his mouth parting slightly. He stared at me as if he was seeing me for the first time. All the walls, all the defenses, all the carefully constructed roles we had been playing for years came crashing down in that single, shared moment of honesty. There was nothing left to hide behind. It was just us, two people in a room, surrounded by the rubble of their old friendship, and faced with the terrifying, beautiful task of deciding what to build in its place. The air in the room seemed to thin, to clarify. My confession, a secret I had carried for so long it had felt like a part of my own anatomy, was finally out, existing in the space between us. It was terrifying. It was liberating. Liam just stared at me, his face a canvas of shifting emotions, shock, disbelief, and then, slowly, a dawning, hesitant understanding. It was as if my words were a key, unlocking a door to a room in his own house that he had never known was there. The pieces of his own confusing behavior, his inexplicable need for my proximity, his fear, they were all beginning to click into place, forming a picture that was new and startling, but undeniably true. "You what?" he finally managed to say, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was not a question of disbelief, but one of verification, as if he needed to hear it again to be sure it was real. "I'm in love with you," I repeated, the words easier the second time. "I think I have been since college. I just got very, very good at hiding it. From you, and mostly from myself." I offered him a small, wry smile. "I'm a photographer. I'm better at observing than participating. It was easier to keep you in perfect focus from a safe distance than to risk blurring the image by getting too close." He shook his head slowly, a look of wonder on his face. "All this time," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "All this time I thought I was just a mess. I thought I was just leaning on you because you were there, because you're a good friend." The best friend. He looked up, his eyes locking with mine, and for the first time, there was no fear in them, only a profound, searching honesty. But it was more than that, wasn't it? Even for me. I didn't want to be near just anyone. I wanted to be near you. When I traveled for work, I wasn't thinking about getting back to the apartment. I was thinking about getting back to you. I didn't have a name for it. It didn't fit into any of the boxes I had for my life. He reached out then, his hand hesitant, and rested it on my knee. His touch was no longer accidental or disguised. It was intentional. It was a question. I covered his hand with my own, my fingers lacing through his. The simple contact was a relief, a grounding force in the emotional storm. It was an answer. "You don't need a box for it," I said softly. "We don't need a name for it. Not yet. We just need to stop being scared of it." A single tear escaped from the corner of his eye and traced a path down his cheek. He did not wipe it away. It was a sign of surrender, a white flag raised after a long and lonely battle. "I'm so tired of being scared," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "And I'm so sorry, for this last week. For pulling away. I was a coward. I hurt you. We were both scared," I corrected him gently. "I was just scared of different things. You were scared of what it meant. I was scared I was imagining it all." I squeezed his hand. "I think we can stop being scared now." We talked for hours, the afternoon sun slanting across the room, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. We unraveled the tangled threads of our shared history, laying them out in the open. We spoke of the small moments, the near misses, the unspoken feelings that had existed in the periphery of our friendship for years. It was like finding a hidden, annotated copy of a book you thought you knew by heart, with notes in the margins that revealed a second, deeper story running parallel to the first. He told me about the pangs of jealousy he'd felt, inexplicable at the time, when I'd briefly dated someone our senior year. I told him about the gut-wrenching pain of listening to him talk about his future with Sarah, a future I could never be a part of. It was a conversation of breathtaking vulnerability, each confession a brick being laid for a new foundation, one built not on assumptions and unspoken rules, but on the solid ground of truth. As dusk settled, painting the city in shades of purple and orange, a comfortable, peaceful silence fell between us. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by a quiet, buoyant energy. We were still sitting on the coffee table and the couch, our hands still linked, our knees still touching. The geography of our living room had been redrawn. The couch was no longer a territory of anxiety and misinterpretation. It was just a couch. The space between us was no longer charged with unspoken tension, but with a calm, steady current of mutual understanding. "So," he said, his voice soft in the growing twilight. He looked at our joined hands, then back at my face. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips, the first I had seen in what felt like an eternity. It was like watching the sun rise after a long night. What happens now? It was the same question I had asked myself in the darkness of that pivotal night, but now it was not laced with fear. It was filled with a hopeful, boundless curiosity. I smiled back. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess we could start with dinner. I'm thinking of ordering from that Thai place you like." His laughter was a warm, beautiful sound that filled the quiet room. "I'd like that," he said. "I'd like that a lot." The days that followed were a gentle unfolding, a slow and deliberate process of learning a new language together. The awkwardness was gone, replaced by a tentative, joyful exploration. We were rediscovering each other, and our home, in this new light. Simple, everyday actions became imbued with new meaning. Making coffee in the morning was no longer a solitary ritual, but a shared dance in our small kitchen. A casual touch on the arm as we passed in the hallway was no longer a potential misstep, but a quiet affirmation. We were mapping out the territory of this new relationship, one small, gentle step at a time. There were no grand, romantic gestures. Our love story was not a sweeping epic. It was a collection of quiet, domestic verses. It was in the way he started leaving the door to his room open, a silent invitation. It was in the way I began to photograph him again, not as a secret, distant subject, but as an active participant, his eyes meeting the lens with an open, loving gaze. A few weeks later, we found ourselves back on the couch for a movie night. It was the first one since our conversation. The air was thick with a sense of unspoken significance. As the opening credits rolled, a familiar and comfortable quiet settled over us. Liam shifted, and I felt my body tense for a moment, an echo of old anxieties. But he did not lean on me. Instead, he simply picked up my hand and held it, resting our joined hands on his leg. It was a simple, declarative act. There was no pretense, no excuse. There was no mention of the temperature. It was just his hand in mine, a comfortable, solid weight. It was a statement of fact. We were together. Later in the movie, he did lean his head on my shoulder, and this time, I did not freeze. I relaxed into the familiar weight of it, tilting my own head to rest against his. It was the same gesture that had once sent my world into a tailspin, but now it felt like coming home. It was easy. It was right. We were healing, both of us. He was healing from the loss of a future he thought he wanted, and I was healing from the long, quiet loneliness of a love I thought I could never have. We were healing in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned to create together. The apartment no longer felt like a stage for a performance, but a true sanctuary, a space built for two. The doors inside ourselves, the ones we had kept locked and guarded for so long, were finally open. We had spent years living side by side, two separate streams running in the same direction. But the earthquake of his grief and the aftershock of our shared honesty had broken down the banks between us. Now, our currents were merging, flowing together into a single, stronger river, heading toward an unknown but shared horizon. Sometimes, when I look at him now, asleep beside me in the quiet of the early morning light, I think about the physics of it all. I think about how a person can be a fixed point and a catalyst for change all at once. Liam had been the steady center of my universe for so long, and yet it was his own world falling apart that allowed mine to finally come together. It was his moment of cold in the sweltering heat of July that created the warmth that now defines my life. And I've come to understand that the most significant moments are rarely the loud, explosive ones. They are the whispers. They are the quiet, nonsensical confessions in the dark. They are the tentative touch of a hand that, in a single, silent gesture, can tell you everything you have ever needed to know, that you are seen, that you are wanted, and that you are, finally, home.